Hi, Mr. Jerry here again, and today we're going to kind of recap what's happened since Easter, and it's been a lot of things. You remember that Jesus appeared first to the women who had come to anoint his body, and then he appeared to two people on the road to Emmaus, and they were so surprised and so thrilled that Jesus was alive. They ran off to tell the disciples. And while they were telling the disciples, Jesus appeared again to the disciples in that room, at least to 10 of them at that point. But Thomas wasn't there, and so once again he appeared and had Thomas say, "Stick your finger in my hand, stick your finger where those nails went through," and Thomas believed. But we said what's important is that we also believe who haven't seen, and we call that faith. And then, about 40 days after Easter, Jesus had all the disciples come to Galilee, up on the top of a mountain, and he commissioned them, we said, and he gave them authority to do miracles, to tell the story to all the nations about what had happened and how he had brought them hope and the promise of a new life. And so the disciples now had to go off and start a church. There was no church at that time. So they had a group of about 120 people. And that those people got together and they said, "Oh, well, how are we going to operate?" And they added to their number. And since 12 was an important number to the disciples, and actually in the whole Jewish world, they had to get one more disciple to replace Judas. And so they did, and they called that man Matthias. And then there was a big festival that was called Pentecost, and that was a time to honor and thank God for the first fruits, the first crops that came in, and that was something the Jewish people did all the time, once a year. And here's what happened on that day of Pentecost. A gust of wind blasted through the house in Jerusalem. The disciples jumped up from the table. Andrew grabbed the bread. John and James grabbed the cups. The tablecloth flew into the air. Plates crashed onto the floor. The disciples were celebrating this festival of Pentecost, but now their meal was a mess. Andrew dropped the bread in surprise. A flame of fire floated above each disciple's heads. The flames were bright red, orange, yellow, but they weren't hot. Andrew pointed to the flames. "Look!" The disciples looked. John and James dropped the cups. Peter and Simon's eyes grew wide. Bartholomew's and Philip's mouths dropped open. Matthew, Thomas, and Matthias gasped. Thaddeus and the other James pointed to Andrew's head. "You have a flame too." And here's what they looked like in all of that. Ooh, pretty exciting time, but nobody got burned. So let's see what happens after all of those people were there. And suddenly, the disciples began to speak in different languages. It was like, "Yo hablo español, je parle français, eu falo portugués." People didn't know what they were saying. Latin, Greek, Arabic, all the languages of the world at that time, and about that time there were about 16 different languages. And these were just Galilean fishermen. How did they do that? "We are filled with God's Spirit," shouted Matthew. "God is the ruler of all," Philip explained. The streets filled with Jewish people from many countries who were celebrating Pentecost in Jerusalem. They'd come from all over the known world at that time. And every person, no matter where they'd come from, heard the disciples speaking about God's power in their own language. How about you? Do you ever hear people speaking in other language? There's a lot of different languages around here. Where might you hear somebody talking in a different language? Think about that for a little bit. Well, in this case, the people couldn't believe their ears. Some in the crowd sneered. They couldn't believe that the disciples could actually speak all the languages. They even thought maybe they had been drinking too much. But they said, "No, it's early in the morning. And some people were amazed. Peter yelled, "Each of you hears our words in your own language. God's Spirit has made this possible." So that's the story of Pentecost, and on that day, 3,000 people were baptized into the faith.